The shuttle's landing sensors chirped as Commander Alara initiated the final descent sequence. Through the viewport, the human settlement appeared small and fragile against the stark, cratered landscape of Lunara, the remote moon orbiting Proxima Centauri. The settlement's domes gleamed under the distant star's ruddy light, interconnected by transparent tunnels like a primitive organism's cellular structure. Inefficient, she noted clinically. The Zarathi would have built underground, minimizing exposure to cosmic radiation and micrometeorites. This was precisely why the High Council had dispatched her, to document human inefficiencies, to understand why, despite their technological capabilities, humans persisted in making choices based on what they called comfort and preference rather than optimal function. As her shuttle settled onto the landing pad, Alara reviewed her mission parameters on her neural interface. 6 standard months of observation, minimal interaction, comprehensive data collection on human behavioral patterns with particular focus on their continued adherence to emotional response mechanisms that the Zarathi had evolved beyond centuries ago. The airlock cycled, and Alara stepped out, her tall, slender frame moving with precise economy. Her silver-blue skin caught the artificial lights of the landing bay as she adjusted to the slightly lower gravity. She wore the standard Zarathi envoy uniform, a sleek utilitarian bodysuit designed for maximum efficiency with integrated data collection nodes at key points. Commander Alara of the Zarathi Observational Corps, she stated to the human delegation waiting at the edge of the platform. Her voice was modulated to exact clarity, devoid of intonation or inflection. I present my credentials and request access to designated research quarters. A man stepped forward from the small group. Unlike his colleagues in their pressed uniforms, he wore a simple jumpsuit with multiple tool pockets, stained with what appeared to be mechanical lubricant. His dark hair curled untidily above eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, a facial contortion that Alara recognized as a human expression of welcome, though she found it oddly asymmetrical. "Welcome to Lunara Station, Commander," he said, his voice carrying modulations that her training identified as warmth. Unnecessary vibrations in the vocal cords that conveyed no additional information. "I'm Aidan Reeve, Chief Engineer. I've been assigned as your liaison during your stay." Alara tilted her head a precise 10 degrees, the Zarathi acknowledgement. "Your assignment is noted. I require orientation to my quarters and operational areas." The human made that facial contortion again smile her memory banks supplied and gestured toward one of the connecting tunnels. "Right this way. I think you'll find your quarters comfortable. We've tried to accommodate what we know of Zarathi preferences." "Comfort is irrelevant," Alara replied as she followed. "Functionality is the only requirement." As they walked, Aiden's movement struck her as curiously inefficient. He swayed slightly, his gait uneven, his hands making small, unnecessary gestures as he spoke. He pointed out features of the settlement with an animation that seemed excessive for mere information transfer. "The hydroponics lab is just through there. That's where we grow most of our fresh food. The engineering section is my domain, that whole western dome. We've got a community space in the central hub where people gather for meals and recreation." He glanced at her. "Do Zarathi eat together?" "We consume nutrients as individually required," Alara replied. "Social consumption serves no evolutionary purpose for our species." Aiden's facial muscles shifted again, but differently, not a smile. "Well, you might find our dining hall interesting then, from a research perspective." They arrived at her designated quarters, a sparse room with minimal furnishings. Alara approved. The humans had at least attempted to eliminate unnecessary objects. "I've uploaded the station's schematics and schedules to your system," Aiden said, making a motion with a small handheld device. "But if you need anything at all, just ping me. I'm usually either fixing something that's broken or preventing something from breaking." His comment was followed by a sound, a brief rhythmic exhalation that her databanks identified as laughter. The sound triggered an unexpected neural response in Alara's auditory cortex, a slight but definite deviation from normal patterns. Curious, she filed the anomaly for later analysis. "Your assistance is acknowledged," she said. "I will begin observations at the start of the next cycle." Aiden nodded, his hand resting briefly on the doorframe. She noticed calluses on his fingertips, evidence of manual labor despite available automation technologies. Another inefficiency. "Well, welcome to our little corner of the universe, Commander," he said, that crooked smile returning. "I think you might find us humans full of surprises." As he left, Alara began arranging her monitoring equipment with mathematical precision. She dismissed his statement as typical human hyperbole. After centuries of evolution beyond emotion, beyond the primitive drives of pleasure and pain, what could possibly surprise a Zarathi observer? Yet as she calibrated her instruments, she found herself replaying the sound of his laughter in her memory, an action without clear purpose or function. Most curious indeed. The emergency sirens wailed throughout Lunara Station, their piercing sound causing Alara to adjust her auditory sensors. Outside the reinforced windows, the moon's dusty surface disappeared beneath swirling clouds of debris as the storm intensified. Atmospheric processors are at maximum capacity, a technician called across the command center, particle density exceeding safe thresholds. Alara stood by the monitoring station, recording the humans' response to the crisis. 23 days into her observation mission, and this was the first significant event. The storm had appeared with unexpected speed, a massive cyclonic disturbance churning up lunar dust and ice particles, creating an abrasive vortex that threatened the station's external systems. Commander, Aiden appeared at her side, his usual easy demeanor replaced by focused intensity. We need to evacuate this section. The primary power coupling for the eastern dome is showing signs of strain. I must continue my observations, Alara stated. This emergency response data is valuable. Your observations won't matter if, a deafening crack interrupted him as the lights flickered, the entire station shuddered. That's it, we're going now. Before Alara could object, his hand was on her arm, the first direct physical contact since her arrival, guiding her toward the exit. The sensation of his fingers through the material of her suit registered as unexpected pressure, temperature variance, and something else she couldn't immediately categorize. They had barely reached the connecting tunnel when a secondary explosion rocked the station. The transparent tunnel flexed alarmingly, and then with a horrifying crack, the seal at the far end failed. Emergency bulkheads slammed down with pneumatic force, isolating them from both the command center and their destination. Containment procedure activated, announced the station's automated system. Section locked down until atmospheric integrity is restored. Alara calculated their situation with perfect clarity. We are isolated in an 8-meter tunnel section with limited resources. If the exterior shell has been compromised, available oxygen will be depleted in approximately. The shell's intact, Aiden interrupted, examining a small control panel. We've got atmosphere, power, and basic life support routed to this section, but comms are down, and we're locked in until the system confirms it's safe to reopen the bulkheads. How long? He shrugged, that inefficient human gesture that conveyed uncertainty. The storm was projected to last at least 48 hours, could be longer. Alara processed this information, that is suboptimal. To her surprise, Aiden laughed, that same curious sound that had caused the neural anomaly during their first meeting. Yeah, you could say that. Being trapped in a glorified glass tube during a lunar dust storm definitely qualifies as suboptimal. He slid down to sit against the curved wall, stretching his legs out before him. From a pocket, he produced a small silver package which he opened to reveal a compressed nutrient bar. Breaking it in half, he offered a portion to her. Hungry? It's not gourmet, but it's standard emergency rations. Alara hesitated. Zarathi consumed nutrients in precisely measured amounts at scheduled intervals. Her next feeding time was not for 3.4 hours, yet the extended emergency might necessitate adaptation. Thank you, she said, accepting the offering another first. The bar was dense and oddly textured against her fingers. When she placed it against her intake membranes, the chemical sensors detected various compounds, proteins, carbohydrates, synthetic vitamins. But then something unexpected happened. As the compounds dissolved, her sensory receptors registered not just their chemical composition, but something else. Something that caused an involuntary contraction in her facial muscles. Good, right? Aiden smiled at her expression. Well, not good exactly, but not terrible for emergency food. Alara had no reference for the sensation. It is different from our nutrient solutions. I bet, no offense, but you Zarathi don't seem big on the pleasures of food. He took another bite, chewing thoughtfully. So while we're stuck here, tell me about your world, what's it like? The question was imprecise. Specify parameters for description. I don't know, what do you miss about it, what makes it home? Miss, I do not experience longing for absent locations. Home is simply the origin point. Aiden studied her, his head tilted. Everyone misses something about home, the light, the smells, the sounds. Zarathi evolved beyond such attachment centuries ago, Alara explained, reciting the foundations of her education. Our neural pathways were redesigned to eliminate inefficient emotional responses. We experience neither pleasure nor pain as primitively defined. That sounds empty, Aiden said quietly. It is optimal, she corrected. Emotions served evolutionary purposes that are now obsolete. They were discarded like vestigial limbs. Outside their transparent prison, the storm raged, particles battering against the reinforced material with a continuous hissing sound. Aiden reached into another pocket and withdrew a small device. Well, if we're stuck here, might as well make it less boring. He touched the device, and suddenly the small space filled with sound, complex patterns of tones and rhythms that Alara recognized as music. "This is unnecessary," she stated. "Music is never unnecessary," Aiden replied, closing his eyes and leaning his head back against the wall. "Just listen, don't analyze, don't categorize, just feel the way it moves." Alara wanted to explain that this was impossible, that Zerathi perception was fundamentally analytical. But as the strange sounds filled their confined space, her auditory receptors registered something unusual. The patterns of sound were creating corresponding patterns of neural activity, distinct from normal processing. For 4.7 minutes they sat in silence, the music flowing around them while the storm continued its assault outside. And somewhere in those minutes, Alara became aware of a new sensation. A slight, rhythmic movement of her central digit against her leg, synchronized with the music's beat. She stilled it immediately, disturbed by the involuntary response. "Your heart rate increased by 3.8%, she informed Aiden, seeking to redirect her focus to observable data. He opened one eye. "Is that your way of saying the music moved me?" "It is a physiological observation." "Same thing," his smile returned as he held her gaze. "You know, Commander, I think there's more to you Zerathi than you admit. No species evolves beyond feeling entirely, it just gets redirected, transformed." Alara considered this statement, finding it both scientifically unsound and yet intriguing. "We have extensive biological records proving otherwise," she said, but with less certainty than before. Outside, the lunar dust continued to swirl, trapping them together in their transparent bubble, far from the eyes of her people. And somewhere in the back of her perfect, logical mind, Commander Alara registered the first faint tremor of doubt about everything she had been taught to believe. 7 days. The storm had raged for 7 full cycles, far beyond projected models. Though they had been moved from the tunnel to an emergency shelter in the agricultural dome after the first 48 hours, Alara and Aiden remained isolated from the main population, cut off by damaged sections of the station that were too dangerous to traverse. The agricultural dome, at least, was spacious. A vast hemisphere filled with hydroponic gardens, atmospheric processors, and a small living quarter. It was self-sufficient by design, capable of operating independently if separated from the main station. And it was here, surrounded by growing things, that Alara began to change. "Try it," Aiden urged, holding out a small red fruit from one of the garden trellises. "It's a strawberry. We engineered them to grow in lower gravity. They're sweeter here than on Earth." Alara hesitated. Over the past days, he had introduced her to numerous sensory experiences that were not part of standard Zerathi practice. Each one had produced unexpected neural responses that both alarmed and something else she couldn't name. "It serves no nutritional need that my supplements do not already address," she pointed out. "It's not about nutrition," Aiden countered. "It's about experience, taste, pleasure." That word again, pleasure. A concept her people regarded as primitive, unnecessary, a relic of less evolved consciousness. Yet she reached for the small fruit, nodding the peculiar texture against her fingertips. Following his earlier instructions, she placed it in her mouth hole. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Her chemoreceptors fired in patterns she had never experienced, sending cascades of signals through neural pathways that had lain dormant for generations. Something happened to her facial muscles, a contraction she couldn't control. "You're smiling," Aiden said softly, his own lips curved upward. "Your first real smile." Alara touched her face, feeling the unfamiliar position of her features. "This is unexpected." "Good unexpected." She considered the question with her usual precision. Unexpected indicates a deviation from anticipated outcomes. Good and bad are value judgments that. Aiden laughed, the sound now familiar enough that it no longer triggered analytical examination. "Just say yes, Commander, you enjoyed it." "Yes," she admitted, the word feeling strange on her tongue. "I enjoyed it." Later that evening, as the storm continued to howl outside the reinforced dome, Aiden connected his device to the shelter's sound system. Music filled the space, different from before, slower, with patterns that seemed to overlap and intertwine. "Dance with me," he said suddenly, standing and extending his hand. "I do not dance," Alara stated. "Zerathi physical movement is purposeful and efficient. Dancing serves no Dancing serves every purpose, he interrupted, his hand still outstretched. It's communication, expression, connection. It's one of the oldest human behaviors, older than language. I lack the necessary skills and coordination for such activity. Nobody's watching, Aiden said gently. Just me, and I promise I won't tell your logical friends back home that you did something just because it felt good. Felt good, the phrase resonated oddly within her. Since arriving at the human settlement, since being trapped with this particular human, Alara had experienced multiple sensations that defied her training, her understanding of her own biology. According to everything she had been taught, such responses should be impossible. Yet they were happenings. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The contact sent another unfamiliar surge through her sensory network, warmth, pressure, and something more complex she couldn't identify. Just follow my lead, Aiden said, placing his other hand lightly at her waist and beginning to move in rhythm with the music. Alara's first steps were precise, measured, attempts to calculate the mathematical pattern of his movements and replicate them with accuracy. But precision seemed to make the movements more difficult, not less. You're thinking too much, Aiden said. Close your eyes, feel the music, feel the movement. I do not understand that instruction. He stopped, considered, then tried again. Okay, Zerathi are scientists, right? So think of this as an experiment. What happens if you move without calculating first? What happens if you just respond? An experiment, that framework she understood. Cautiously, Alara closed her eyes, allowing her other senses to compensate. The music surrounded her, vibrations traveling through the floor into her body. Aiden's hand at her waist was a warm anchor point, guiding without forcing. Gradually, her movements became less stilted. The dance became a flow of action and reaction, a conversation without words, and somewhere in that wordless dialogue, something shifted within her neural architecture. Pathways long dormant began to awaken, carrying signals that her ancestors had deemed unnecessary, had engineered away. Yet here they were, flickering to life like distant stars. When the music ended, they stood close, hands still connected, breathing slightly faster than normal. Aiden looked at her with an expression she was learning to recognize, wonder. You felt it, didn't you? He asked quietly. Alara knew she should deny it, should record these aberrant responses as anomalies to be reported to the Zerathi Neurological Council upon her return, should maintain the distance that her training demanded. Instead, she nodded. I felt something. His hand tightened slightly around hers. That's the beginning, he whispered. That's always the beginning. In the artificial night of the agricultural dome, surrounded by growing things while a storm raged outside, Commander Alara of the Zerathi stood at the threshold of a discovery her people had declared impossible. The awakening of sensation, the first trembling notes of pleasure. And the most disturbing realization of all, she did not want it to stop. Your neural patterns show significant deviation, said the stern face on the communication screen. High Commander Vector of the Zerathi Science Directorate stared at Alara with the characteristic lack of expression that marked their species. Abnormal activity in regions associated with primitive response mechanisms. Explain. Alara stood perfectly still before the transmission unit, her posture regulation perfect despite the turmoil within. 2 weeks had passed since the storm subsided enough to restore partial communications with the main station and with her homeworld. 2 weeks of continued research that had become something far more complicated. Environmental factors have necessitated adaptive responses, she replied, selecting her words with careful precision. The extended isolation period during the storm required flexibility in behavioral protocols. Not a lie, not exactly, yet not the complete truth either, a concept that would have been foreign to her before meeting Aiden. These readings suggest dangerous regression, Vector continued. The Council is concerned that prolonged exposure to humans has triggered atavistic neural patterns. You will return immediately for examination and purification. Alara's hands tightened imperceptibly at her sides. My mission parameters specified a 6-month observation period. Preliminary data collection is incomplete. The mission parameters have been revised. A retrieval vessel has been dispatched. You will be extracted in 7 cycles. 7 cycles, 7 days. The timeframe hit her with unexpected force, causing a physical sensation in her abdominal region that she now recognized as distress. Acknowledged, she said, maintaining outward calm. I will prepare relevant research materials for transfer. The communication ended and Alara stood motionless before the blank screen. 7 days. Then back to the Zerathi homeworld where her aberrant neural patterns would be detected, analyzed, and purified, reset to standard parameters, erasing everything she had experienced, everything she had become. Everything about Aiden's. The thought of losing these new sensations, these awakened pathways, created a response so intense she had to brace herself against the console. Her people would call it corruption, contamination, but she had begun to see it differently. Not regression but expansion, not weakness but possibility. That evening she found Aiden in his usual place in the engineering lab, surrounded by components and tools, his hands moving with practiced ease as he repaired a circuit board. "Hey," he said, looking up with that now familiar smile that created cascading responses throughout her system. "I was wondering where you disappeared to today." "I received communication from my homeworld," she said, the words emerging with uncharacteristic difficulty. "I am being recalled. A vessel will arrive in 7 days." His hand stilled. Something changed in his expression, a subtle shift she would never have noticed before but now recognized as pain. 7 days, he repeated, "that's sooner than expected." "Oh, yes." He set down his tools carefully, deliberately. "And will you go?" The question hung between them, laden with meanings that would have been incomprehensible to her when she first arrived on this moon. Before she had tasted sweetness, before she had danced, before she had discovered that everything her people believed about themselves might be wrong. "It is my duty," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own hearing apparatus. Aiden stood and moved toward her, stopping just short of touching her, a boundary he had learned to respect. "What about what you want?" "Want is irrelevant in Zarathi culture." "But you're not just Zarathi anymore, are you?" he challenged gently. "These past weeks you've been changing, feeling, responding." She could not deny it. Every day brought new sensations, new responses, the taste of fresh fruit, the texture of growing plants beneath her fingers, the complex harmonies of music that now created corresponding harmonies within her neural structure. And most of all, the increasing awareness of Aiden himself, his presence, his movement, the sound of his voice creating responses that defied categorization. "These changes are considered corruption by my people," she explained. "Neural aberrations to be corrected." "And what do you consider them?" he asked, his voice softer now. Alara hesitated, awareness expanding with each passing moment. "I am uncertain." With deliberate slowness, Aiden raised his hand and held it palm up between them, an invitation, not a demand. "Then let me help you decide," he whispered. She looked at his outstretched hand, the calluses, the small scars from years of working with tools, the unique patterns of his fingerprints. In that moment, her decision crystallized with the precision that characterized her species. She placed her hand in his. The contact sparked through her sensory network like lightning. But this time, she did not pull away, did not analyze, did not categorize. She simply experienced it, allowed it to flow through systems designed to suppress precisely these responses. They moved closer, drawn together by forces that transcended the logical, the efficient, the purely functional. When his lips met hers, another first, the sensation expanded beyond anything she had yet experienced. Touch, taste, scent, sound, all her sensory systems engaged at once, creating a feedback loop of response that left her neural network reeling. Later, in the privacy of his quarters, illuminated only by the soft blue emergency lights, Alara discovered the full extent of what her people had denied for centuries. As Aiden's hands moved across her skin, as his body joined with hers, pleasure overwhelmed her in waves of escalating intensity. Every touch, every movement awakened new pathways, new possibilities. Her body remembered what her ancestors had tried to forget, that it was designed for this, had evolved for this connection, this communion of sensation and response. Afterward, lying beside him in the strange comfort of shared warmth, Alara faced the truth her people had buried beneath centuries of logic and control. "This is what they fear," she whispered. "Not that we can't feel, but that we can, that we always could." Aiden traced patterns on her silver blue skin, each touch sending small ripples of pleasure through her newly awakened senses. "They told you it was a myth," he said, echoing her thoughts. "But maybe, it was just waiting for the right person to show you." 6 days remained before the Zarathi vessel would arrive. 6 days to decide between duty and discovery, between the familiar certainty of her former existence and this new, chaotic, exhilarating potential. Between a world without sensation and a life with Aiden. The Zarathi extraction vessel hung in orbit above Lunara, its sleek crystalline form visible through the observatory dome as a bright point of light against the star-scattered blackness. Commander Alara stood before the communications array, her formal uniform impeccable, her posture regulation perfect. Only Aiden, standing slightly behind her, could see the subtle tension in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands, physical manifestations of the conflict raging within her. Final transmission clearance approved, announced the station's communication system. Channel open to Zarathi command. Alara took a precise step forward. This moment, this exact configuration of time, space, and decision would determine everything that followed. Behind her, she could sense Aiden's presence, his warmth, his silence as he honored her need to make this choice alone. The screen flickered to life, revealing High Commander Vector and two members of the Zarathi Science Directorate. Commander Alara, Vector acknowledged. The extraction team will shuttle to the human station in 2.3 hours. Prepare your research materials and be ready for immediate departure. I have prepared a comprehensive data package, Alara replied, her voice steady despite the unfamiliar sensations coursing through her. It contains all observations and analyses from my time among the humans. Satisfactory, your neural patterns will require extensive purification upon return, but the data will be valuable. Alara drew herself straighter, a decision crystallizing with each word. The data package will transfer, I will not. A long silence followed, the Zarathi equivalent of shock. Explain, Vector finally demanded. My research has led to a discovery that contradicts our most fundamental beliefs about Zarathi biology, Alara stated. We have not evolved beyond sensation. We have suppressed it, buried it beneath layers of neural conditioning and biological modification. But it remains dormant, not deleted. The Science Directorate members exchanged glances, a rare display of uncertainty among her people. These are the corrupted thoughts of a contaminated mind, one said dismissively. The human influence has damaged your neural architecture. No, Alara countered, it has awakened what was already there, what has always been there. With deliberate movement, she reached behind her. Without looking, she knew Aiden's hand would be waiting. Their fingers intertwined, a simple gesture that would horrify her people, a physical connection that sent waves of sensation through her newly awakened neural pathways. This is regression, Vector stated flatly. Return for correction or be declared non-Zarathi. The threat should have terrified her. To be declared non-Zarathi was to lose everything, identity, position, connection to her entire civilization. Yet standing there, Aiden's hand warm in hers, the threat seemed hollow compared to what she would lose by returning. You call it regression, Alara said. I call it remembering. Our ancestors engineered emotion and sensation out of our species because they feared its power, its unpredictability. They chose control over experience, function over feeling, but they could not eliminate it entirely. It waited dormant for the right stimulus to reawaken it. She stepped closer to the screen, still holding Aiden's hand. I am not returning. I have discovered something our people have forgotten, that pleasure is not weakness. It is strength. It is connection. It is, she paused, searching for the precise word, freedom. This decision violates the highest law of our species, Vector warned. There will be no return from this path. I understand. Alara's voice remained steady. I accept non-Zarathi status. My final research transmission contains all data collected, including my own neural scans showing the reactivation of dormant pathways. Study them. They prove that what we call evolution was actually suppression. Behind her, Aiden squeezed her hand gently, support without words. The implications of your claims will be evaluated, one of the Science Directorate members said, a hint of curiosity breaking through the typical Zarathi monotone. But your choice is noted and final. It is, Alara confirmed. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the screen dark. For a moment, neither Alara nor Aiden spoke. Then, turning to face him, she allowed the full range of her new emotions to show on her face, fear, sadness, but most of all, a profound relief. Are you okay? Aiden asked softly. I am experiencing multiple contradictory responses, she admitted. Is this normal? His smile, that wonderful asymmetrical curve that had first captured her attention, appeared. Completely normal. It's called being alive. Through the observatory dome, they watched as the Zarathi vessel collected her transmitted data package, and then, without further communication, disappeared into faster-than-light travel, a brief flash against the cosmic dark before vanishing completely. With its departure, Alara felt something release within her, the last tethers of her old existence giving way to this new reality she had chosen. For the first time since her arrival on this remote moon, she acted without calculation, without analysis. She pulled Aiden close and kissed him with all the newly awakened passion she had discovered in his arms. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, she touched his face with wondering fingers. My people will study the data. Perhaps someday they will understand what I have discovered here. And if they don't, he asked. Alara felt her facial muscles contract in that expression she now recognized as a smile, a real one, born of genuine emotion rather than mimicry. Then they will continue as they have for centuries, believing sensation is extinct, believing pleasure is weakness. Her smile deepened. But they are wrong, and we know it. Against the backdrop of stars, in the artificial environment of a human outpost on a remote moon, the first Zerathi in generations to truly feel stood wrapped in the arms of the man who had shown her what her people had forgotten. Not through logic or analysis or scientific proof, but through music and strawberries and dancing and touch. Through love. And for the first time in her existence, Commander Alara, now simply Alara, was exactly where she wanted to be.